there's a 4-month testing protocol period where you are not allowed to fight. That way, in case you're somebody, you can't just take off, get out of the UFC, juice up, come down on the, so now you have an off season where you're not being tested, and then come back in and then, okay, well, I'm here now. Let me fight in 30, 45 days.
Sort of quote unquote retire and then come back when everything's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you clear your system and then go ahead and go fight. And, if you do that within a month, you're going to have the benefits of whatever drugs you took. And I'm assuming the 4-month period, the reason why they make it so long is because whatever drugs you took at that moment, 4 months later, are not going to really help you out. And so the UFC are the ones that made that exemption to help Brock get into that fight. And they benefited from that exemption, having such a large name, blockbuster, or the Brock Lesnar is a pay-per-view seller to be on the card. So now they reaped benefits and made an exemption. They took a risk. Well, Hunt, was hurt by that. He found out he fought somebody who was on drugs that was enhanced. He suffered a loss. He says that he suffered injuries from it. So their decision to do so had repercussions upon him. They can say that they tested him 30 times up until the fight, that they really tried. It's like, but you still you made an exemption, and Hunt suffered from that exemption. Where's your suffering?
Yeah.
Did you compensate Mark in some way, going, look, we apologize for what happened. Here's an extra $500,000, 7.5, whatever, to put some skin in the game, I guess, is basically the term I'm looking for here.
Yeah.
They made an exemption and don't have to suffer any of the repercussions of that decision. They didn't have to walk in that octagon with Brock. And they got the benefit of having all the pay-per-view sales and all the marketing leading up to making UFC 200 such a large card, which was a very pivotal moment for them because that was their last hurrah right before they sell the UFC. So it was very in their benefit to have Brock have a huge name, especially, remember Conor McGregor was supposed to be on there. They pull him off because he doesn't want to do press. They were starving to have a name. And so they obviously through necessity made it happen. And so how could he not have a case?
You know what is striking to me in retrospect as I think about it and the way that whole scenario played out around UFC 200, because you're right, Conor McGregor was pulled off because he wasn't going to do media and he didn't come in for the press conference, so they're absent a headliner. Then they scramble to get Brock back in the mix and they give him the USADA exemption. But, it seems like, especially given that they had spent so much money, such a huge financial investment on that USADA program, that they kind of undermined all that that exemption. It's kind of like I
think this is also, too, is showcasing why they need to get rid of USADA. They're opening themselves up because the UFC now has brought in USADA. It's their contract with USADA. They work hand in hand. Jeff Nowinski works there inside Zuffa building. He's the representative that works back and forth with USADA, so if they just would have had this be a commission deal, they could dodge this all completely altogether. If it was only the Nevada Athletic Commission that had given exemption or tested, how could the UFC be on the hook at all right now through litigation?
Yeah.
They'd be completely bulletproof right now. I'd be like, well, we don't deal with that. That's Nevada Athletic Commission. They are the ones that do the testing. They're the ones that deal with this. And I'm a fan of that anyways, because they don't have in my opinion, a dog in the race, because they're there, the commission, they make money. The UFC comes in, they pay their licensing fees. Even if they fine you, they don't have a benefit. So their business structure is not based upon drug testing, whereas USADA is completely based upon drug testing. So I think it's a conflict of interest, in my opinion. So, and also too, it makes it to where the UFC, where at first you think it's an extra layer, like, oh, we're bringing in other people, so now the commissions are testing. Well, no, now you just kind of put it on yourselves. You could have avoided this altogether and just kept it with the commissions who've been doing it for years and doing it fine.
Does it bug you that you get mentioned on paper with this because of the circumstances? Like, you happen to be Mark Hunt's last opponent before Brock Lesnar, right? You've got the USADA suspension. Lesnar's got the USADA suspension. There's a lot of difference between the two, but that's not going to get explained on paper every single time it's referenced. You know what I mean?
But really, I thought it was silly mentioning me and Bigfoot Silva, and then Vitor Belfort saying, well, they had TUEs. That wasn't the UFC that allowed us to have exemptions. That was the different athletic commissions.
Yeah.
So once again, I mean, that wasn't the brightest. Well, I don't know how smart the lawyers are. That to me was kind of a tree. Why bother barking up? It's like, guys, you're not going to win that battle. The commission's laid out a protocol. We all followed the rules. You signed the contract knowing that we were following those rules. How are you going to get into that afterwards? How are you going to sit there and go, well, I'm not happy that they did this? Like, well, you signed it. You know what I mean? Like, you knew what you were getting involved in, so what's the deal?
Yeah.
Whereas with the Brock thing, I could see how you could say, well, I didn't realize that, that he was going to have drugs in his system, and the door was open because you guys didn't have him testing for 4 months.
Oh, yeah. No, I think once you really start breaking down the details, it's clear why. For example, Hunt's not mentioning the other fights. He's focusing on what happened at UFC 200 with Brock, as he should, because that arbitrary USADA exemption came into play. Right. I'm just saying it's tough. It's unfortunate because of the circumstances, his opponents are listed, and there's just kind of you get lumped in, I guess is what I'm saying. I realize that, but I don't have any hard grievance towards Mark. I feel that, Mark's a very nice guy. I don't know how, in-depth intellectually he is. I didn't strike me as a real, super deep thinker or anything, just a nice guy, that general, pleasant person. Yeah. I think, and I don't know him either, but I just, looking at it from a standpoint, I kind of get why, his main focus is not to be breaking down the differences and the nuances and the subtleties.
And it really doesn't matter to him. I think it just adds a little bit to where he's trying to be the victim here a little bit, pointing out, well, I had to fight this guy, that guy. But I mean, really, he could just focus really where I think he has in a case where it's like, you exempted someone out of the 4-month protocol period. Yeah. That's what allowed them to have these drugs in their system.
Yeah.
And that's what gave them an athletic advantage. Because I think the other thing people are looking at is that, from what I've researched and looked at now, estrogen blockers, or the things that Lesnar was taking, are a post cycle type of drug set, meaning that you've been on drugs now for 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever your period of time is. Then when you come off of it, there's negative side effects from getting off of the drugs. So these drugs that Brock was taking are post-cycle type of drugs to help him regulate his body back into natural. So what that tells me is that Brock, why he wasn't under contract with the UFC, was obviously on drugs, real drugs that were making him big and strong and super lean. And then he signs a contract, obviously with enough time to get off those drugs. That's why they weren't in his system. But he got to have the benefit of all the strength and power that he had in his off season. So the whole reason why the 4-month testing protocol has been input is to avoid the benefit that Brock was able to reap, where he looked pretty strong and ripped to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that if the UFC had seen this coming with Mark Hunt, that they would have matched him up against somebody besides Alistair Overeem? Because now that just looks all the worse. I mean, when you talk about you made a match with a guy who was already, I don't think he really telegraphed this lawsuit, but he had already been pretty vocal about being upset with circumstances coming out of the Lesnar fight. Then you pair him with a guy who has been so closely, who has tested positive in the past, way before USADA, and has had issues with that. It seems like that's a little bit of a, if they thought that it was really going to come to this, seems like you would have maybe wanted to pair him with somebody else just so you didn't create this added layer of a narrative.
Yeah, I think it blindsided them too. I don't think they realized, or I don't know. I guess they didn't look at it, that deeply and how it's going to be the court of public opinion.
Well, and the
UFC, they win a lot. Really, who's gone up against the UFC and won?
Well, and
and that kind of creates a confidence to where you're like, who cares?
Well, and I'm just thinking about because when you do go to court, you're going to be arguing this in front of people who are going to have a basic understanding, I guess, of what UFC is, or they'll have it explained to them, but it's not like they've been following the top 10 rankings for the last 5 years,
Right.
probably on a jury. So it's going to be like, I mean, if you can imagine having this explained to you for the first time, and he's laying out his case, and then he's like, oh, and by the way, the guy that they got me fighting next, here's his history. You know, I just think it'd be the kind of thing like a jury could look at and go, wow. You know, that's their but they
can also say, then, do they force you to fight him? I mean, is there?
Yeah.
Don't you have a decision? Isn't there a bout agreement where you have to? We come at you and say, "Hey, well, you want to fight so and so," and you say no.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that it might initially look bad, but I think it's easily diffused. Be like, "Sir, he has the ability to choose who he wants to fight. We put up fights in front of him. He didn't have to choose Alistair over him."
All right. Now, Hunt is saying that he took the fight with Overeem. Despite everything that's happened, he took the fight because he needs to make money like everybody else, and that's understandable. But do you think, from a strategic standpoint, that there's actually kind of a crafty advantage to being booked for what will likely be at least co-main event on a big card, and then filing the lawsuit? Because they can't pull you out of the bout. I mean, they can't make it, all eyes are on the situation now. So it's not like the UFC can go, oh, well, never mind, we're going to take you off of the fight card. That'd be the worst PR move they could do right now. So it's kind of like you guaranteed yourself a center spotlight position for the next couple of coming months, especially as the fight gets closer. Oh, and by the way, I've got an active pending lawsuit against the organization.
No, that's true. Actually, now that you point that out, that is pretty smart as far as being able to create PR for yourself and getting people to watch. And also, too, it's going to stress the hell out of the UFC, because could you imagine if Alistair doesn't...
No, I could not imagine.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well,
I think he has a good case with the whole, because the UFC did something, gave an exemption to allow him to step out of that testing pool. That exemption gave Brock an advantage that we found out later on through testing that he was on drugs. I don't think it's a hard connection that he was obviously taking harder core drugs, and this was his post-cycle that got popped.
Yeah.
And so,
But again, how about the fact that the UFC chose to give that exemption to Brock Lesnar? I mean, some of this, it seems like you're courting disaster in terms of the particular person you're choosing to give it to. It's not like Joe Lozon is coming out of a brief retirement.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not like you're looking at a guy going,
throwing a picture up on the
that's what
prompter
I'm talking
and be like,
about.
well, this guy.
That's what I
Do
mean.
you think that it's it's unheard of? I mean, there was potential that he could have been used, and then
that was
he went
my
back
point.
into pro wrestling, which has a
Right.
prevalent reputation for
that
drugs.
was my point.
So.
Yeah, I didn't mean to pick on Joe Lozon. I was just trying to think of an example of someone who
you would think that. I mean,
that
honestly,
would make sense for
giving Angela Hill an exemption to go ahead and
or
makes
that,
way more sense than
Yeah.
giving Brock an exemption.
Yeah, totally.
Anybody with any kind of history or any kind of suspects, you would think that the UFC would want to cover themselves and not go there, but they took that chance, and so that's why I think they are open for damages.